The trading post fell silent as Running Wolf's hand closed around the small wrist. The little girl, no more than 8, froze like a startled fawn, the bottle of rum half hidden in her threadbare sack. Her eyes, wide with terror, met his weathered face. The white settlers watched, expecting the Apache to call for the sheriff or worse. Instead, he knelt down as she whispered words that cut through the dusty air. "If I don't bring it, Dad will hurt me." Tears streaked her dirt-smudged cheeks. Running Wolf's expression shifted, memories of his own childhood flickering across his face. What would make a hardened warrior choose mercy when everyone expected justice? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the valley as Running Wolf gathered herbs near his solitary camp. His weathered hands moved with practiced precision, selecting only the plants his grandfather had taught him to recognize. Beside him lay a worn leather medicine pouch, its surface etched with symbols that told the story of 3 generations of healers. 45 winters had passed since his birth, each one etching deeper lines around his eyes. The Apache healer paused, listening to the wind rustling through the pines. This land had once belonged entirely to his people. Now he lived in this small patch of wilderness, tolerated but never truly welcomed by the settlement nearby. His mind drifted back to the girl in the trading post. Those frightened eyes had stirred memories he'd long buried, of a small boy cowering in the corner of a teepee, watching his father rage after drinking the white man's poison. His father, once a proud warrior, had become a shadow of himself, destroyed by the very spirits he'd sought to ease his pain. The medicine pouch trembled slightly in his grip. His grandfather had given it to him the day he found the boy hiding by the river, bruised and sobbing. "The white man's water burns away more than pain," the old man had said, gently cleaning the boy's wounds. "It burns away the spirit." For 10 summers, his grandfather had taught him the healing ways, how to mend bodies with herbs and souls with wisdom. When the old man journeyed to the spirit world, Running Wolf had inherited not just the medicine pouch, but the responsibility it represented. "Harrison will be expecting me," he murmured to himself, tucking the gathered herbs inside the pouch. The trading post owner was one of the few white men who treated him with a measure of respect. Perhaps because Harrison's wife had been saved by Running Wolf's remedies during the fever that swept through the settlement 3 winters ago. Titigil. Path to town was familiar, a winding trail, through scrubby juniper and across a shallow creek. Running Wolf walked it twice each month to trade herbs and handcrafted remedies for supplies he couldn't make himself. The settlers' suspicious glances had become as predictable as the changing seasons. The medicine pouch bounced gently against his hip as he walked, each step stirring memories. His wife, Morning Flower, had adorned it with intricate beadwork before the birth that had taken her life 5 years earlier. Their son had not survived either, leaving Running Wolf alone with his healing and his memories. He thought again of the girl's words. "If I don't bring it, Dad will hurt me." The truth in her voice had been unmistakable. He had seen the familiar marks of violence on her thin wrists, the fear that lived permanently in her eyes. The trading post appeared ahead, a squat building marking the edge of the settlement. Running Wolf paused, as was his custom, observing from a distance. Several horses were hitched outside, more than usual. Word of yesterday's encounter had likely spread. The settlers would be watching him with renewed suspicion today. His hand moved instinctively to the medicine pouch, drawing strength from its connection to his ancestors. His grandfather's voice seemed to whisper from within its weathered leather, "A healer mends what is broken, regardless of the skin that covers it." Running Wolf straightened his shoulders. The girl's pain had called to him in a way he couldn't ignore, not as a man, not as a healer. The townspeople might never understand why an Apache would concern himself with a white child suffering. They didn't need to understand. The medicine pouch at his side carried generations of wisdom that transcended the boundaries men created. With quiet resolve, Running Wolf continued toward the trading post. Whatever consequences awaited, he would face them with the dignity his grandfather had taught him. Some wounds couldn't be seen, and some medicines weren't found in any pouch, but he would offer what healing he could to the girl with frightened eyes. Emma Wilson swept the dirt floor of the cabin with methodical strokes, careful not to raise dust that might trigger her father's temper. Morning sunlight filtered through the lone window, illuminating dancing particles in the air despite her efforts. In the corner lay a small tin box, once bright with painted flowers, now dented and faded. It had been her mother's sewing kit, the last connection to a gentler time. Girl. "Where's my coffee?" Her father's voice boomed from the rickety bed pushed against the far wall. Thomas Wilson's face was grey with stubble, his eyes bloodshot from last night's rum. "Coming." "Pa!" Emma's voice was barely audible as she hurried to the wood stove where the battered coffee pot simmered. The tin box would have to wait. At 8 years old, Emma had mastered the art of invisibility. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make noise. Don't spill anything. Don't cry when Pa's hand swings too hard after drinking. The rules were unspoken, but carved into her heart, like the notches her father once put on his rifle stock. The cabin stood a quarter-mile from town, close enough for Thomas to stumble to the saloon, far enough that neighbors couldn't hear Emma's sobs. One room with a lean-to shed served as their entire world since her mother died of fever 2 winters past. "This tastes like dirt." Thomas spat the coffee onto the floor Emma had just swept. "Can't you do nothing right?" Emma stood silent, eyes fixed on the fresh dirt stain. Any response would only make things worse. "I'm heading into town." He lurched to his feet, grabbing his worn jacket. "This place better be clean when I get back. And I expect supper ready." The door slammed behind him, and Emma's shoulders dropped with relief. These hours alone were precious, the only time the cabin felt like something other than a prison. She retrieved the tin box from its corner, opening it with reverent care. Inside, nestled among scraps of fabric and mismatched buttons, lay her secret. Not her mother's thimble or the half-finished embroidery, but a tiny newspaper clipping with a drawing of a grand house back east. "One day," she whispered to the picture. "One day." The morning stretched before her with chores, mending her father's shirts, scrubbing the single pot they used for everything, fetching water from the stream behind the cabin. But first, Emma allowed herself 5 precious minutes with the tin box and its treasures. Mrs. Baker from the bakery had slipped her a molasses cookie yesterday, asking about the bruise on her cheek. Emma had mumbled something about falling. The woman's eyes had shown disbelief, but like everyone else in town, she asked no further questions. Thomas Wilson's temper was well known, but interfering in a man's household was not done. By midday, Emma had completed most chores and ventured to the stream with their water bucket. This was her favorite place. The gentle gurgle of water over stones sounded like her mother's lullabies. Here she could pretend she lived differently. The tin box came with her sometimes, but today she left it hidden under the loose floorboard beneath her sleeping pallet. Instead, she brought the memory of yesterday, of the tall Apache man whose eyes had shown something she rarely saw: kindness. Everyone in town feared the Indians, especially the medicine man who came to trade herbs at Harrison's store. But when he caught her stealing the rum, when his strong hand had closed around her wrist, his touch had been gentle. And when she'd whispered the truth about why she needed the bottle, something in his face had changed. Emma dipped her fingers in the cool water, remembering how her mother used to tell her that water washed away more than dirt. "It can cleanse your spirit too, little one," she'd say, splashing Emma's face to make her giggle. The water felt good against her skin, but it couldn't wash away her fear of returning home empty-handed. Pa would be expecting his rum tonight, and after the Indian had paid for the bottle yesterday, Mr. Harrison had refused to sell her another, saying she should come back with her father next time. Emma filled the bucket and turned back toward the cabin. The tin box with its dreams would have to stay hidden a while longer. Tonight would be dangerous. Pa without his rum was like a bear with a thorn in its paw. She'd need all her invisibility skills to survive until morning. Emma Wilson swept the dirt floor of the cabin with methodical strokes, careful not to raise dust that might trigger her father's temper. Morning sunlight filtered through the lone window, illuminating dancing particles in the air despite her efforts. In the corner lay a small tin box, once bright with painted flowers, now dented and faded. It had been her mother's sewing kit, the last connection to a gentler time. Girl. "Where's my coffee?" Her father's voice boomed from the rickety bed pushed against the far wall. Thomas Wilson's face was grey with stubble, his eyes bloodshot from last night's rum. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Running Wolf is my real name. In my language it is Hokon Nawiwi." Emma attempted to repeat it, stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds, which drew a genuine smile from Running Wolf. "Running Wolf is easier," she conceded. From his pocket, he withdrew a small, smooth stone, river-polished granite with a vein of quartz running through it like a lightning bolt. He'd found it that morning and had been carrying it as a reminder of how strength and beauty often existed side by side. "The stone is stronger than the water," he said, holding it out to her. But it was the water that revealed its beauty. Emma accepted the stone, turning it in her palm. The quartz caught the sunlight, sending tiny rainbows dancing across her face. For a moment she looked simply like a child, not a frightened, burdened one. "Is it magic?" she asked. "All things carry their own medicine," he answered. "This one speaks of endurance, of surviving the river's force and becoming something new." Emma pocketed both the stone and her cloth scrap. "Why'd you help me back there? With the bottle?" Running Wolf considered his answer carefully. "When I was a boy, my father also drank the white man's water. He would become someone else after drinking." Understanding dawned in Emma's eyes, the recognition that transcended differences in skin and language. "Did he hurt you too?" "Yes." Running Wolf saw no reason to shield her from this truth. "Until my grandfather took me to live with him and taught me healing ways." Emma glanced toward her home, then back at Running Wolf. "There's nobody to take me away. There is always a path. Little one. Sometimes we cannot see it yet." He straightened, aware they had been talking too long. "People would be suspicious. Keep the stone close. Perhaps it will help you find your path." Emma nodded, clutching her sack with the rum bottle inside. "I gotta go. But we'll be looking for this soon. I will be at the trading post in 7 days, Running Wolf reminded her. "If you need medicines or stories about stones." The ghost of a smile touched her lips, perhaps the first genuine one in months. 7 days, she echoed. Running Wolf watched as she hurried down the path toward her cabin, her slight figure growing smaller against the landscape. The red cloth scrap had disappeared into her pocket alongside the stone, 2 talismans from different worlds. He turned back toward town, wondering if he had done the right thing or simply complicated her already difficult life. What he knew with certainty was that he would return in 7 days, and he would bring more than just herbs to trade. Emma slowed her steps as the cabin came into view. Smoke curled from the chimney. Pa was home already. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she clutched the sack containing the rum bottle. Hanging from a nail beside the door was her father's old cavalry canteen, dented and scratched from his years in the Union Army. Once a symbol of pride, now it held only water for his morning-after headaches. She paused at the woodpile, gathering courage. The canteen caught the late afternoon sun, reflecting a distorted version of the world around it, much like her father's mind after drinking. "That you, girl?" Thomas Wilson's voice boomed from inside. "Don't dawdle." Emma pushed open the door, the familiar smell of unwashed clothes and stale tobacco hitting her nostrils. Her father sat at the rough-hewn table cleaning his hunting knife. Once a handsome man, Thomas Wilson had shrunk into himself since her mother's death, his face permanently creased with bitterness, his eyes hollow except when brightened by rum. "You get it?" He didn't look up from the knife. Emma nodded, pulling the bottle from her sack. "Yes, Pa." His eyes flicked to the bottle, then narrowed. "Where'd you get the fancy pouch?" Emma's throat tightened. She'd forgotten about Running Wolf's buckskin pouch. "Mr. Harrison gave it to me for carrying stuff," Thomas grunted, unconvinced but too focused on the rum to press further. He snatched the bottle, examining the seal. "Took you long enough. Where were you lollygagging?" "Just talking to Mrs. Baker," Emma lied, moving toward the stove to start supper. The stone Running Wolf had given her pressed against her thigh through her pocket, a small comfort. Thomas uncorked the bottle, taking a long swallow. Emma kept her back to him, peeling potatoes with methodical precision. The soft scrape of her knife against the potatoes couldn't mask the sound of the rum sloshing in the bottle as her father drank again. "That Apache was asking about you," Thomas said suddenly. Emma's knife slipped, nearly cutting her finger. She steadied her hand. "What Apache?" "At Harrison's store. Running Wolf, they call him." Another swallow. "Why would an Indian be asking Harrison about my business?" Emma shrugged, not trusting her voice. Had Running Wolf gone back to the store after walking with her? "You stay away from him, you hear me?" Thomas's voice hardened. "Nothing but trouble, those savages." "Yes." "Pah!" Emma dropped the potatoes into the pot, adding water from the bucket. The cavalry canteen caught her eye again through the window, swinging slightly in the breeze. Her father had once told her how it had saved his life during the war, carrying water when his regiment was cut off from their supply lines. "A man can live without food for weeks," he'd said during one of his rare lucid moments, "but without water, you're dead in days." Now he poured rum down his throat, as if it were that life-saving water. By the time supper was ready, Thomas had consumed nearly a quarter of the bottle. His movements were looser, his eyes glazed but not yet mean. This was the safest time, after he'd had enough to ease his craving, but before he drank enough to awaken his demons. "Ma's birthday is next week," Emma said quietly as they ate. Thomas's fork paused halfway to his mouth. For a moment, something like grief crossed his face. "Is it now?" Emma nodded. "I was thinking maybe we could pick some wildflowers. Put them on her grave." The flash of humanity vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Thomas returned to his food. What good would that do? "Dead is dead." Emma pushed her potatoes around her plate. The stone in her pocket felt suddenly heavier. Running Wolf had called it a stone of endurance. She wondered how much more enduring she would need to do. After supper, Thomas took the bottle to his rocking chair by the fireplace. "Clean up and get to bed," he ordered, already lost in the amber liquid and whatever memories it conjured. Emma washed the dishes quietly, watching from the corner of her eye as her father's head began to nod. Soon, his snores filled the cabin. Only then did she retrieve the stone and red cloth from her pocket, examining them in the fading firelight. She slipped beneath the loose floorboard, under her sleeping pallet, adding them to her tin box of treasures. The cavalry canteen glinted through the window, catching the last rays of sunlight. Once it had carried salvation, Emma wondered if Running Wolf's stone might somehow do the same for her. 7 days suddenly seemed very far away. The Frontier Herald lay open on the counter of Harrison's trading post, its weathered pages catching the morning light. The weekly newspaper, printed in the county seat 20 miles away, rarely contained news that hadn't already traveled by word of mouth through the small settlement. Still, it represented connection to the wider world, and townsfolk often gathered around it during their errands. "Says here, the railroad might be coming through Carson's Ridge next year," Harrison commented, adjusting his spectacles as Mrs. Baker examined a bolt of calico. "That's only 15 miles south," she replied, her plump fingers testing the fabric's quality. "Would change things around here, wouldn't it?" Sheriff Miller, leaning against the counter nursing his morning coffee, grunted non-committally. "Bring more trouble than it's worth, likely." The bell above the door jingled as Jenkins the blacksmith entered, followed by Reverend Porter, the town's aging preacher. Both men nodded greetings, their eyes landing on the newspaper. "Any word on that Indian situation over in Kansas territory?" Jenkins asked, helping himself to coffee from the pot on the wood stove. "Nothing new," Harrison replied, folding the paper. "Speaking of Indians, though, that business with the Wilson girl yesterday?" Mrs. Baker interrupted, lowering her voice. "I've been meaning to ask about that. What exactly happened, Mr. Harrison?" Harrison glanced around the store, ensuring they weren't overheard. Running Wolf caught her stealing a bottle of rum. Paid for it himself when she said her pa would hurt her if she came home without it. That poor child, Mrs. Baker sighed. Sarah Wilson was a fine woman. She'd be heartbroken to see what's become of her family. Sheriff Miller straightened. Now we don't know that Thomas is actually hurting the girl. He'd say all sorts of things. She didn't say it for attention, Sheriff, Harrison countered quietly. She was terrified. Reverend Porter cleared his throat. I've tried calling on Thomas several times. He refuses to let me pass the door, says he has no use for God anymore. War changed him, Jenkins said. He was a different man before Gettysburg. Lost his faith along with his leg. Mrs. Baker's hands stilled on the fabric. That's no excuse for what he's becoming, or what he might be doing to Emma. The newspaper rustled as Harrison refolded it. What puzzles me is Running Wolf's interest. Why would an Apache concern himself with a white child's troubles? Nothing good can come of it, Sheriff Miller declared. I've warned him to keep his distance. Last thing we need is Thomas Wilson shooting an Indian for interfering with his family. Running Wolf is a healer, Harrison said thoughtfully. Been trading with him for 8 years. Never known him to hurt anyone. Coming, Pa. Emma's voice was barely audible as she hurried to the wood stove where the battered coffee pot simmered. The tin box would have to wait. At 8 years old, Emma had mastered the art of invisibility. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make noise. Don't spill anything. Don't cry when Pa's hand swings too hard after drinking. The rules were unspoken, but carved into her heart, like the notches her father once put on his rifle stock. The cabin stood a quarter-mile from town, close enough for Thomas to stumble to the saloon, far enough that neighbors couldn't hear Emma's sobs. One room with a lean-to shed served as their entire world since her mother died of fever 2 winters past. This tastes like dirt. Thomas spat the coffee onto the floor Emma had just swept. Can't you do nothing right? Emma stood silent, eyes fixed on the fresh dirt stain. Any response would only make things worse. I'm heading into town. He lurched to his feet, grabbing his worn jacket. This place better be clean when I get back. And I expect supper ready. The door slammed behind him, and Emma's shoulders dropped with relief. These hours alone were precious, the only time the cabin felt like something other than a prison. She retrieved the tin box from its corner, opening it with reverent care. Inside, nestled among scraps of fabric and mismatched buttons, lay her secret. Not her mother's thimble or the half-finished embroidery, but a tiny newspaper clipping with a drawing of a grand house back east. One day, she whispered to the picture, one day. The morning stretched before her with chores, mending her father's shirts, scrubbing the single pot they used for everything, fetching water from the stream behind the cabin. But first, Emma allowed herself 5 precious minutes with the tin box and its treasures. Mrs. Baker from the bakery had slipped her a molasses cookie yesterday, asking about the bruise on her cheek. Emma had mumbled something about falling. The woman's eyes had shown disbelief, but like everyone else in town, she asked no further questions. Thomas Wilson's temper was well known, but interfering in a man's household was not done. By midday, Emma had completed most chores and ventured to the stream with their water bucket. This was her favorite place. The gentle gurgle of water over stones sounded like her mother's lullabies. Here, she could pretend she lived differently. The tin box came with her sometimes, but today she left it hidden under the loose floorboard beneath her sleeping pallet. Instead, she brought the memory of yesterday, of the tall Apache man whose eyes had shown something she rarely saw. Kindness. Everyone in town feared the Indians, especially the medicine man who came to trade herbs at Harrison's store. But when he caught her stealing the rum, when his strong hand had closed around her wrist, his touch had been gentle. And when she'd whispered the truth about why she needed the bottle, something in his face had changed. Emma dipped her fingers in the cool water, remembering how her mother used to tell her that water washed away more than dirt. It can cleanse your spirit too, little one, she'd say, splashing Emma's face to make her giggle. The water felt good against her skin, but it couldn't wash away her fear of returning home empty-handed. Pa would be expecting his rum tonight. And after the Indian had paid for the bottle yesterday, Mr. Harrison had refused to sell her another, saying she should come back with her father next time. Emma filled the bucket and turned back toward the cabin. The tin box with its dreams would have to stay hidden a while longer. Tonight would be dangerous. Pa without his rum was like a bear with a thorn in its paw. She'd need all her invisibility skills to survive until morning. Emma Wilson swept the dirt floor of the cabin with methodical strokes, careful not to raise dust that might trigger her father's temper. Morning sunlight filtered through the lone window, illuminating dancing particles in the air despite her efforts. In the corner lay a small tin box, once bright with painted flowers, now dented and faded. It had been her mother's sewing kit, the last connection to a gentler time. "Girl, where's my coffee?" Her father's voice boomed from the rickety bed pushed against the far wall. Thomas Wilson's face was grey with stubble, his eyes bloodshot from last night's rum. "Coming." "Pa!" Emma's voice was barely audible as she hurried to the wood stove where the battered coffee pot simmered. The tin box would have to wait. At 8 years old, Emma had mastered the art of invisibility. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make noise. Don't spill anything. Don't cry when Pa's hand swings too hard after drinking. The rules were unspoken, but carved into her heart, like the notches her father once put on his rifle stock. The cabin stood a quarter-mile from town, close enough for Thomas to stumble to the saloon, far enough that neighbors couldn't hear Emma's sobs. One room with a lean-to shed served as their entire world since her mother died of fever 2 winters past. "This tastes like dirt." Thomas spat the coffee onto the floor Emma had just swept. "Can't you do nothing right?" Emma stood silent, eyes fixed on the fresh dirt stain. Any response would only make things worse. "I'm heading into town." He lurched to his feet, grabbing his worn jacket. "This place better be clean when I get back. And I expect supper ready." The door slammed behind him, and Emma's shoulders dropped with relief. These hours alone were precious, the only time the cabin felt like something other than a prison. She retrieved the tin box from its corner, opening it with reverent care. Inside, nestled among scraps of fabric and mismatched buttons, lay her secret. Not her mother's thimble or the half-finished embroidery, but a tiny newspaper clipping with a drawing of a grand house back east. "One day," she whispered to the picture, "one day." The morning stretched before her with chores, mending her father's shirts, scrubbing the single pot they used for everything, fetching water from the stream behind the cabin. But first, Emma allowed herself 5 precious minutes with the tin box and its treasures. Mrs. Baker from the bakery had slipped her a molasses cookie yesterday, asking about the bruise on her cheek. Emma had mumbled something about falling. The woman's eyes had shown disbelief, but like everyone else in town, she asked no further questions. Thomas Wilson's temper was well known, but interfering in a man's household was not done. By midday, Emma had completed most chores and ventured to the stream with their water bucket. This was her favorite place. The gentle gurgle of water over stones sounded like her mother's lullabies. Here, she could pretend she lived differently. The tin box came with her sometimes, but today she left it hidden under the loose floorboard beneath her sleeping pallet. Instead, she brought the memory of yesterday, of the tall Apache man whose eyes had shown something she rarely saw: kindness. Everyone in town feared the Indians, especially the medicine man who came to trade herbs at Harrison's store. But when he caught her stealing the rum, when his strong hand had closed around her wrist, his touch had been gentle. And when she'd whispered the truth about why she needed the bottle, something in his face had changed. Emma dipped her fingers in the cool water, remembering how her mother used to tell her that water washed away more than dirt. "It can cleanse your spirit too, little one," she'd say, splashing Emma's face to make her giggle. The water felt good against her skin, but it couldn't wash away her fear of returning home empty-handed. Pa would be expecting his rum tonight. And after the Indian had paid for the bottle yesterday, Mr. Harrison had refused to sell her another, saying she should come back with her father next time. Emma filled the bucket and turned back toward the cabin. The tin box with its dreams would have to stay hidden a while longer. Tonight would be dangerous. Pa without his rum was like a bear with a thorn in its paw. She'd need all her invisibility skills to survive until morning. The dirt path leading from town stretched before them, Emma walking ahead, Running Wolf following at a respectful distance. Dust rose with each step, catching the afternoon sunlight. Clutched in Emma's hand was a small piece of red cloth, a scrap of her mother's old dress that she kept in her pocket like a talisman. Rubbing it between her fingers when fear threatened to overwhelm her, neither spoke at first. The girl occasionally glanced back, confirming the Apache still followed, her expression a mixture of wariness and curiosity. Running Wolf maintained the distance, his footsteps deliberately audible so as not to startle her. They passed the smithy at the edge of town, the rhythmic clanging of metal on metal fading behind them. When they reached the split in the path where one fork led to the Wilson cabin and the other continued toward the creek, Emma stopped. She turned, waiting for Running Wolf to approach. "You don't have to follow no more," she said, her voice small against the vast landscape. "I won't be home yet." Running Wolf nodded, noting how her shoulders remained tense, how her eyes darted toward her home, then back to him. "Your father," he said carefully, "he drinks this firewater often?" Emma's fingers tightened around the red cloth scrap. "Every night, more on Sundays. And your mother?" "Oh, though he already suspected the answer gone. Fever took her winter before. Last," her matter-of-fact tone spoke volumes about how quickly children on the frontier learned about death. Running Wolf crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level, not looming over her like most adults did. "What is your name, little one?" "Emma Wilson." She hesitated, then asked, "What's yours?" "Your real one, I mean." "Still an Indian," Jenkins muttered. Mrs. Baker turned from the calico. "He saved my Matthew's life during the fever 2 winters back, when our own doctor had given up." "Exception, that proves the rule," Sheriff Miller replied. "Anyway, a man's household is his own business, even when a child is being harmed." Mrs. Baker challenged. An uncomfortable silence fell over the store. The newspaper lay between them on the counter, its headlines about distant political disputes, suddenly trivial compared to the moral question before them. Reverend Porter finally spoke. "Scripture tells us to care for widows and orphans in their distress. Emma may have a father, but in some ways she's as good as orphaned. What do you propose, Reverend? That we march out there and take the girl?" Sheriff Miller asked. "On what grounds?" "A bruise that might have come from falling. A child's word against her father's?" The bell jingled again as Dr. Spencer entered, nodding to the assembled group. "Morning, all. Did I interrupt something?" "We were discussing the Wilson situation," Mrs. Baker explained. "And the Apache who helped Emma yesterday." The doctor set his bag on a chair. "I've been meaning to check on that child. Thomas won't bring her in, even when she's ill." Harrison tapped the newspaper. "There's law in these pages about child welfare, isn't there, Sheriff?" Miller shifted uncomfortably. "Territory laws vague on family matters. And who would take the girl? The orphanage in Carson's Ridge is overcrowded as it is. Perhaps," Mrs. Baker suggested carefully, "we should at least watch the situation more closely, especially with this Apache taking an interest." The group fell silent again, the newspaper between them a reminder of laws and civilization that sometimes failed to protect the most vulnerable. Outside, dust swirled as a wagon passed, heading toward the Wilson cabin at the edge of town. The frontier demanded self-sufficiency and respected privacy, but it also required community survival, a delicate balance now tested by a small girl's plight and an unexpected ally from another world. The Frontier Herald lay open on the counter of Harrison's trading post, its weathered pages catching the morning light. The weekly newspaper, printed in the county seat 20 miles away, rarely contained news that hadn't already traveled by word of mouth through the small settlement. Still, It represented connection to the wider world, and townsfolk often gathered around it during their errands. Says here the railroad might be coming through Carson's Ridge next year, Harrison commented, adjusting his spectacles as Mrs. Baker examined a bolt of calico. That's only 15 miles south, she replied, her plump fingers testing the fabric's quality. Would change things around here, wouldn't it? Sheriff Miller, leaning against the counter nursing his morning coffee, grunted non-committally. Bring more trouble than it's worth, likely. The bell above the door jingled as Jenkins the blacksmith entered, followed by Reverend Porter, the town's aging preacher. Both men nodded greetings, their eyes landing on the newspaper. Any word on that Indian situation over in Kansas Territory? Jenkins asked, helping himself to coffee from the pot on the wood stove. Nothing new, Harrison replied, folding the paper. Speaking of Indians, though, that business with the Wilson girl yesterday, Mrs. Baker interrupted, lowering her voice. I've been meaning to ask about that. What exactly happened, Mr. Harrison? Harrison glanced around the store, ensuring they weren't overheard. Running Wolf caught her stealing a bottle of rum. Paid for it himself when she said her pa would hurt her if she came home without it. That poor child, Mrs. Baker sighed. Sarah Wilson was a fine woman. She'd be heartbroken to see what's become of her family. Sheriff Miller straightened. Now, we don't know that Thomas is actually hurting the girl. Kids say all sorts of things. She didn't say it for attention, Sheriff, Harrison countered quietly. She was terrified. Reverend Porter cleared his throat. I've tried calling on Thomas several times. He refuses to let me past the door, says he has no use for God anymore. War changed him, Jenkins said. He was a different man before Gettysburg. Lost his faith along with his leg. Mrs. Baker's hands stilled on the fabric. That's no excuse for what he's becoming. Or what he might be doing to Emma. The newspaper rustled as Harrison refolded it. What puzzles me is Running Wolf's interest. Why would an Apache concern himself with a white child's troubles? Nothing good can come of it, Sheriff Miller declared. I've warned him to keep his distance. Last thing we need is Thomas Wilson shooting an Indian for interfering with his family. Running Wolf is a healer, Harrison said thoughtfully. Been trading with him for 8 years. Never known him to hurt anyone. Still an Indian, Jenkins muttered. Mrs. Baker turned from the calico. He saved my Matthew's life during the fever 2 winters back, when our own doctor had given up. Exception, that proves the rule, Sheriff Miller replied. Anyway, a man's household is his own business, even when a child is being harmed. Mrs. Baker challenged. An uncomfortable silence fell over the store. The newspaper lay between them on the counter, its headlines about distant political disputes, suddenly trivial compared to the moral question before them. Reverend Porter finally spoke. Scripture tells us to care for widows and orphans in their distress. Emma may have a father, but in some ways she's as good as orphaned. What do you propose, Reverend? That we march out there and take the girl? Sheriff Miller asked. On what grounds? A bruise that might have come from falling. A child's word against her father's? The bell jingled again as Dr. Spencer entered, nodding to the assembled group. Morning, all. Did I interrupt something? We were discussing the Wilson situation, Mrs. Baker explained, and the Apache who helped Emma yesterday. The doctor set his bag on a chair. I've been meaning to check on that child. Thomas won't bring her in, even when she's ill. Harrison tapped the newspaper. There's law in these pages about child welfare, isn't there, Sheriff? Miller shifted uncomfortably. Territory laws vague on family matters. And who would take the girl? The orphanage in Carson's Ridge is overcrowded as it is. Perhaps, Mrs. Baker suggested carefully, we should at least watch the situation more closely, especially with this Apache taking an interest. The group fell silent again, the newspaper between them a reminder of laws and civilization that sometimes failed to protect the most vulnerable. Outside, dust swirled as a wagon passed, heading toward the Wilson cabin at the edge of town. The frontier demanded self-sufficiency and respected privacy, but it also required community survival, a delicate balance now tested by a small girl's plight and an unexpected ally from another world. 3 days had passed since Emma's encounter with Running Wolf. each one marked by the careful notches she carved into the underside of her wooden stool. The crude calendar was hidden from her father's sight, but served as her beacon. 4 more notches until she could return to the trading post. The stool itself was nothing special, 3-legged and uneven, fashioned from pine by her father during a rare sober period, but the marks beneath it held the promise of something different. Tuesday brought rain, turning the dirt floor of their cabin damp at the edges. Emma's father stayed in bed late, nursing a headache from the previous night's drinking. When he finally rose, his mood was as dark as the clouds outside. "Damn leg's killing me," he muttered, rubbing the stump where his knee should have been, the Union Army uniform pants pinned neatly below it. Weather always makes it worse. Emma silently prepared a breakfast of cornmeal mush, keeping her eyes lowered. The bottle from 3 days ago was nearly empty. Soon her father would send her for another, but the buckskin pouch Running Wolf had given her was hidden beneath the floorboard. She couldn't risk her father seeing it. "Might be heading to town later," Thomas Wilson said, watching the rain through the cabin's single window. "Need supplies?" Emma nodded, hope and fear warring within her. Town meant a chance to glimpse Running Wolf if he was there. It also meant the saloon, which never ended well. "You can come along. Carry things." It wasn't a request. By midday, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. They set out, Emma trailing behind her father as he limped along the muddy path, leaning heavily on his crutch. She'd become expert at judging his moods from the rhythm of his movements. The sharper the jab of the crutch into the earth, the more dangerous his temper. Today, the crutch stabbed deep with each step. The town appeared through the mist. Buildings hunched against the wet grey day. As they passed the churchyard, Emma glimpsed her mother's grave, a simple wooden marker now weathered by 2 years of sun and rain. She whispered a silent greeting as always. "Hurry up, girl," her father called. Already several paces ahead, at Harrison's trading post, Emma lingered near the door while her father arranged for supplies. Flour, coffee, salt pork, and inevitably another bottle. Her eyes scanned the store hopefully, but there was no sign of Running Wolf. Of course not. He'd said 7 days. "Emma Wilson." "How lovely to see you, dear." Mrs. Baker approached, her round face creased with genuine warmth. She glanced toward Thomas Wilson, now arguing with Harrison over credit terms, then quickly pressed something into Emma's hand. "A little something for you," she whispered. "Hide it quick." Emma closed her fingers around a small corn-husk doll, crudely but lovingly fashioned with a calico dress and yarn hair. She slipped it into her pocket just as her father turned around. "What are you two whispering about?" he demanded, eyes narrowing. "Just telling Emma how much she's grown," Mrs. Baker replied smoothly. "Sarah would be proud of her." Thomas's face darkened at the mention of his dead wife. "We're leaving," he told Emma, gesturing to the supplies Harrison had gathered. "Carry those." Emma hoisted the heavy parcel, feeling the corn-husk doll press against her leg through her pocket. Something had changed in the way Mrs. Baker looked at her. There was concern there and something else. Knowledge. As they left the store, Sheriff Miller approached, nodding to Thomas. "Wilson, been meaning to stop by your place." "What for?" Thomas's voice held immediate defensiveness. "Just checking on folks after that coyote trouble last week." "Heard some were getting close to your property." Emma knew there had been no coyotes. The sheriff's eyes flicked to her briefly, assessing, before returning to her father. "We're fine," Thomas replied curtly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, it's about to rain again." They continued toward the saloon, where Thomas instructed Emma to wait outside with the supplies. "I won't be long," he lied. Seated on the saloon steps, parcel beside her, Emma withdrew the corn-husk doll for a closer look. A tiny folded paper had been tucked into the doll's dress. She carefully unfolded it to find a message in Mrs. Baker's neat handwriting. "If you ever need help, come to my back door. Any time." Emma refolded the note and returned it to the doll's dress before hiding it away again. 4 more notches on her stool. 4 more days until she could see Running Wolf. Above her, thunder rolled across the sky as the rain began again in earnest. Through the saloon window, she could see her father already downing his first drink. The wooden stool waited at home, ready for tonight's notch. Another day survived. Another day closer to something. Emma wasn't sure what, but for the first time, she felt the possibility of change carved into more than just wood. The seventh day dawned clear and cool, autumn asserting itself in the crisp morning air. Emma had risen before first light, completing her chores with unusual efficiency. Her father, still sleeping off the previous night's whiskey, hadn't stirred when she slipped out the door. A handful of late wildflowers clutched in her fist, her excuse if questioned about her early wandering. At her mother's grave, Emma knelt briefly, placing most of the flowers at the base of the wooden marker. She kept one bloom, a resilient purple aster, tucked in her pocket beside Mrs. Baker's corn husk doll. Not a gift exactly, but something of her own to give. Harrison's trading post wouldn't open for another hour, but Emma positioned herself on a fallen log with a clear view of the approach from the north, where Running Wolf would come if he kept his promise. She withdrew a small object from her other pocket, a whittled wooden spoon her father had made during his better days. The spoon had been her mother's favorite, its handle worn smooth from years of use, stirring stews and porridges. Emma had taken it that morning, her first real theft from her father. Unlike the rum, this wasn't for him. This was for her. The sun climbed higher, warming the dew-damp earth. Harrison arrived to open the trading post, raising an eyebrow at Emma's presence, but asking no questions. Other townsfolk began their morning routines, the blacksmith lighting his forge, Reverend Porter sweeping the church steps, Dr. Spencer carrying his bag toward a house on the far end of town where a baby was expected. Then she saw him. Running Wolf approached from the North Trail, his stride purposeful but unhurried. He wore a faded blue trade shirt over buckskin leggings, a leather bag slung across his shoulder. His eyes found Emma immediately, as if he had known exactly where to look. She didn't run to him. Such a display would draw unwanted attention. But she stood, clutching the wooden spoon tightly. "You came," she said when he reached her. The simple statement holding more emotion than she'd intended. Running Wolf nodded. "I said 7 days." His gaze noted the fading yellowish bruise at her temple, partially hidden by her hair, but he made no comment on it. "I brought—" Emma hesitated, suddenly self-conscious about her meager offering. She extended the wooden spoon. "It was my ma's, for stirring medicines and such. Thought you might use it." Running Wolf received the spoon with both hands, a gesture of respect that made Emma stand a little straighter. He examined the smooth depression worn in the bowl, the subtle grain of the wood. "A good tool," he said finally, "made with care. I will use it with honor." He slipped the spoon into his bag and withdrew a small leather pouch tied with sinew. "I have brought something as well." "For your father's sickness." Emma accepted the pouch cautiously. "What kind of medicine?" "Herbs to calm the spirit when it craves the burning water, to ease the pain that makes him seek forgetting." Running Wolf's voice was matter-of-fact. "Mix a pinch with his coffee each morning. It has no taste, he will notice." Emma tucked the pouch away. "Will it stop him drinking?" "No medicine can do that alone, but it may help his body fight against the craving, make him less angry when he does not have it." They moved toward the trading post, maintaining a careful distance from each other as more townspeople appeared on the street. Harrison nodded to Running Wolf as they entered, his eyes curious but not unfriendly. "Need any help today?" Running Wolf asked Harrison, his English deliberate but clear. "Could use a hand restacking those flour sacks," Harrison replied, gesturing to the back storeroom. As Running Wolf worked, Emma lingered nearby, asking quiet questions about the herbs in the pouch, about his camp, about the Apache ways of healing. He answered patiently, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "The stone you gave me," she said finally. "I keep it under the floor with my special things." Running Wolf paused in his work. "Good. Some medicine works best when kept close but hidden. My pa's been asking about you. Says I'm to stay away." A shadow crossed Running Wolf's face. "Yet you are here." Emma nodded, twisting the purple aster between her fingers. "Didn't seem right not to come, after you paid for the rum and all." Harrison approached with a small sack of cornmeal and a few strips of dried beef. "Payment for your help," he told Running Wolf. Then, to Emma's surprise, he handed her a peppermint stick. For you, Miss Wilson. No charge. Emma blinked, unused to such kindness from adults besides Mrs. Baker. Thank you, sir. As she accepted the candy, she noticed how Harrison's gaze moved meaningfully between her and Running Wolf, how his expression held something unspoken but significant. "Come back in another 7 days," Running Wolf said as they parted outside the store. "I will bring more medicine if needed." Emma nodded, the wooden spoon now gone from her pocket, but the weight of the herb pouch taking its place. A fair trade between unlikely friends on the edge of two worlds. The herbs lasted 6 days. Each morning Emma had dutifully added a pinch to her father's coffee, watching carefully for changes. By the 4th day, Thomas Wilson seemed less agitated, his hands steadier as he carved wooden pegs for a broken chair. He even spoke of going hunting, something he hadn't done since before her mother died. On the 6th evening, Emma reached into the hiding place beneath the floorboard and felt the empty leather pouch. Tomorrow she would see Running Wolf again, if she could find an excuse to go to town. The thought warmed her despite the autumn chill seeping through the cabin walls. On the shelf above the fireplace sat her father's old pocket watch, tarnished silver with a cracked crystal face. It had stopped running years ago, the delicate mechanism damaged during a fall in one of his drunken stupors. Her mother had saved to have it repaired for his birthday, but the fever had taken her before she could. The watch remained frozen at 4:17, a small piece of arrested time that Thomas Wilson couldn't bear to part with, even to sell for drink. "What are you looking at, girl?" Her father's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway returning from checking his rabbit snares. "Nothing, Pa. Just building up the fire." Thomas limped to his chair, setting his crutch against the wall.
"Fire's fine."
"Got 2 rabbits for supper." He held up the small carcasses, already skinned and gutted. "You cook them up proper, like your ma used to." Emma nodded, surprised by his clear eyes and steady hands. The herbs were working, just as Running Wolf had promised. Maybe tomorrow she could ask directly to go to town, instead of having to sneak away. As she prepared the rabbits, Thomas reached for his bottle, the new one he'd purchased 3 days ago. It was still nearly full, another promising sign. But as he uncorked it, he frowned, sniffing the contents. "Smells off," he muttered. Emma kept her eyes on the rabbits, her heart suddenly racing. Had he noticed something about the coffee? Had she used too much of Running Wolf's medicine? Thomas took a small sip, his frown deepening. "Tastes wrong, too." His eyes narrowed, watching Emma's tense shoulders. "Been feeling strange all week." "Not sick exactly, different." Emma slid the rabbits into the pot, adding salt and the few dried vegetables they had left. "You been putting something in my food, girl?" Thomas's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "No, Pa, just cooking like always." He rose from his chair, moving with a quickness that belied his disability. Before Emma could react, he had grabbed her arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "Don't lie to me. Someone's been tampering." His eyes burned with sudden suspicion. "That Indian, at the store. Harrison said you were talking with him." Emma tried to pull away. "He just helped me once, that's all." Thomas's grip tightened. "Helped how?" His free hand went to her pocket, pulling out the empty leather pouch she'd forgotten to hide. "What's this? What have you been giving me?" "Just herbs. To help you feel better." Tears sprang to Emma's eyes. "You've been drinking less. You've been better." For a moment, something like confusion crossed Thomas Wilson's face. Then his expression hardened. "So you admit it. Poisoning your own father. On the advice of some savage. Not poison," Emma cried. "Medicine!" Like Ma would have wanted. The mention of her mother was a mistake. Thomas shoved Emma away with such force that she stumbled against the table, knocking over the bottle. Rum spilled across the rough wooden surface, its sharp smell filling the cabin. "Look what you made me do!" Thomas roared, lunging for the toppling bottle. Emma seized the moment to dart toward the door, but her father was faster than she expected. His hand caught her hair, yanking her backward with a painful jerk. What followed happened in flashes, the back of his hand against her cheek, the wall hard against her shoulder, her desperate scramble toward the door again. This time she made it outside, hearing her father's curses behind her as he struggled with his crutch. The pocket watch lay forgotten on the shelf, its hands forever pointing to 4:17, bearing witness to the moment Emma's hope for her father shattered like its crystal face. Darkness had fallen, but a half-moon provided enough light for her to run. She had no destination in mind beyond away from the rage, away from the pain, away from the bitter disappointment of a cure that had almost worked. Behind her, she heard the cabin door slam open, her father's voice bellowing her name. Ahead lay the woods, then the creek, and somewhere beyond that, Running Wolf's camp. She had never been there, didn't know exactly where it was, but instinct and desperation drove her forward into the gathering shadows. Blood trickled from her split lip, and one eye was already swelling shut. Each breath sent pain through her ribs, where she'd hit the table. Still, she ran, the stopped pocket watch marking a time that would never move forward again, the exact moment Emma Wilson decided never to return home. Running Wolf woke suddenly, his senses alert to a disturbance he couldn't immediately identify. The night was deep, stars scattered across the black expanse above his camp. Nothing moved in the darkness, yet something had pulled him from sleep with urgent fingers. He sat up, listening. Wind through pines, a distant owl. The soft popping of cooling embers from his fire. Then he saw it. His grandfather's bone whistle lay on the ground beside his sleeping blanket, though he distinctly remembered hanging it from the center pole of his shelter before retiring. The small carved whistle, fashioned from an eagle's wingbone and adorned with a single red feather, had been his grandfather's most potent tool for calling spirits. Running Wolf had never used it himself, honoring the old man's warning that such power demanded responsibility. Yet now it lay before him. As if placed there deliberately, Running Wolf lifted the whistle, feeling its familiar weight. His grandfather had told him, "When this calls to you, someone walks between worlds, needing guidance home." Without conscious decision, Running Wolf raised the whistle to his lips and blew a single soft note. The sound traveled beyond normal hearing, vibrating through the space between worlds. He waited, bone whistle clutched in his palm, certain now that something was wrong. The girl, it must be Emma. Rising quickly, Running Wolf rekindled his fire, then gathered his medicine pouch. He secured a knife at his belt and slung a water skin over his shoulder. If the whistle had awakened him, there was purpose in it, brother. Yellow Hawk materialized from the shadows, concern etching his features. "I heard the whistle. Something calls me to search," Running Wolf replied, already moving toward the perimeter of his camp. "The white child may be in danger." Yellow Hawk grasped his arm. "It's the darkest part of night. Wait until dawn." Running Wolf shook his head, the bone whistle warm against his skin. "Her need will not wait for the sun." Without further explanation, he set off toward the creek that separated his territory from the settlement. Yellow Hawk followed silently, recognizing the determination in his brother's stride. They traveled swiftly through familiar terrain, guided by starlight and instinct. As they neared the creek, Running Wolf paused, lifting the bone whistle again. This time, he did not blow, but held it before him like a compass. There. He pointed northwest, where the land rose toward rocky outcroppings. She would not know the safe crossing. The brothers forded the creek at a shallow point, water numbing their feet in the autumn chill. On the far bank, Running Wolf crouched, studying the ground. "No tracks," Yellow Hawk observed. "How can you be certain?" Running Wolf held up the whistle. "Grandfather's spirit guides me tonight." They continued in the direction the whistle seemed to pull them, moving more carefully now in unfamiliar territory. An hour passed, then another. The moon began its descent toward the western horizon. "Wolf," Yellow Hawk whispered, pointing. Something pale lay crumpled at the base of a rock formation. As they approached, the shape resolved into a small figure, motionless against the stone. Emma lay unconscious, her face bloody and swollen, one arm bent at an unnatural angle. Her clothes were torn from brambles, and her breath came in shallow gasps. Running Wolf knelt beside her, the bone whistle humming faintly in his pocket as if completing its purpose. His practiced hands moved gently over her injuries, the broken arm, cracked ribs, numerous contusions. Most concerning was the chill of her skin and the bluish tint to her lips. "She will not survive the journey to my camp," he said. Meeting his brother's gaze, Yellowhawk studied the child's battered form, his expression grave. To take her to the White Town would raise questions. Questions already exist. "Answers will follow." Running Wolf carefully lifted Emma, cradling her small body against his chest. "We must treat her now, here." Working swiftly, the brothers built a small shelter of branches, creating a windbreak around a new fire. Running Wolf set Emma's broken arm, while Yellowhawk gathered specific plants under the moonlight, crushing them into poultices for her wounds. Throughout their ministrations, Emma remained unconscious, occasionally whimpering in pain. Running Wolf sang healing songs passed down through generations, his voice blending with the night sounds around them. Near dawn, Emma's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, fear flashed across her face before recognition dawned. "Running Wolf," she whispered, her split lip making speech painful. "Be still, little one," he soothed, offering water. "You are safe now, my pa." Tears filled her eyes. Did this? Running Wolf completed her sentence, his voice gentle but certain. "The bone whistle led us to you." Emma's gaze shifted to the object, hanging from a leather cord around his neck. The eagle bone gleamed white in the firelight, its single red feather stirring in the breeze. "It called you?" she asked, confusion mingling with wonder. Running Wolf nodded. "Some medicine works in ways the white man's world cannot understand." He tucked a blanket around her. "Rest now. When you are stronger, we will decide what comes next." As Emma drifted back to sleep, Running Wolf exchanged glances with Yellowhawk. Both men knew that in helping this child, they had crossed a boundary that could not be uncrossed. The bone whistle had chosen their path for them, binding their fate to that of a white girl who now had nowhere else to go. Sheriff Miller adjusted his worn leather gun belt, the holster's familiar weight settling against his hip. 20 years of wearing the badge had taught him that trouble came in predictable patterns. Saturday nights at the saloon, paydays at the lumber mill, spring roundups when cowhands blew into town, but a missing child. That was the kind of trouble that made his stomach knot. "She ain't been seen since yesterday evening," Thomas Wilson insisted, his bloodshot eyes darting nervously around the sheriff's office. "Must have wandered off after dark. Got lost in the woods." Miller studied Wilson's face, noting the defensive set of his jaw and the way his gaze wouldn't quite settle. "Any reason she might have left on purpose, Thomas?" Wilson's knuckles whitened around his crutch. "What are you implying?" "Not implying anything. Just asking what every man in that search party out there is wondering." Miller gestured toward the window, where a dozen townsfolk had gathered in the grey morning light. Wilson's face flushed. "I'm a God-fearing man who lost his wife and his leg. That don't make me a bad father. Nobody's saying it does." Miller reached for his hat. "But Dr. Spencer mentioned treating Emma for awful lot of falls this past year." "Clumsy like her mother was," Wilson muttered. Miller chose not to respond to that. Sarah Wilson had been many things, but clumsy wasn't one of them. Outside, the search party waited. Harrison from the trading post, Jenkins the blacksmith, Reverend Porter, and several other men from town. Dr. Spencer stood slightly apart, medical bag in hand, his expression grim. "We'll start at Wilson's place," Miller announced, "then work outward. Look for tracks, clothing, anything that might show which way she went." Mrs. Baker pushed through the crowd, her normally cheerful face etched with worry. "I should have done something sooner," she said, wringing her hands. "That poor child. Done what exactly?" Thomas Wilson demanded, emerging behind the sheriff. Mrs. Baker stiffened. "Emma had bruises, Thomas. Weeks of bruises. She flinched whenever someone raised a hand near her, even just to pat her head." Murmurs rippled through the gathered townsfolk. Wilson's face darkened. "You spreading lies about me, Martha Baker. After all Sarah and I did for your family during the blizzard of '67. "No one's spreading anything," Miller intervened. "Right now we focus on finding Emma. Questions come later. The search party moved toward the Wilson cabin, tension thick between them. Miller walked beside Wilson, watching him from the corner of his eye. The man's story didn't sit right. A child wandering off after dark for no reason. But without evidence of wrongdoing, the sheriff had to proceed carefully. At the cabin, the signs of struggle were immediately evident. An overturned chair, a broken plate, dried blood on the table edge. Looks like she hurt herself when she fell, Wilson explained hastily. That's why I got worried. She was bleeding. Dr. Spencer knelt by the bloodstain, examining it with practiced eyes. Consistent with a head wound, he said neutrally, though his expression told Miller he suspected otherwise. Harrison discovered the first clear sign outside, small footprints leading away from the cabin toward the woods. She was running, he observed, pointing to the depth and spacing of the prints. Not walking. The tracks led to the creek, then grew confused along the bank. Miller organized the men into groups, sending them in different directions to cover more ground. Thomas, you stay here in case she comes back, he ordered, not trusting Wilson to be part of the search. It's my daughter, Wilson protested. And your leg won't keep up, Miller countered firmly. You'll slow us down. As the sheriff turned to leave, Mrs. Baker approached him privately. Sheriff, there's something you should know. About that Apache running wolf. Miller frowned. What about him? Emma's been meeting him. At the trading post. She lowered her voice. He gave her something. Herbs of some kind. For Thomas's drinking. The sheriff's hand moved instinctively to his gun belt. How do you know this? She told me last week. She trusted him, Sheriff. Said he was kind to her. Miller processed this information, his expression hardening. You think she might have run to him? If she was scared enough, yes. Mrs. Baker hesitated. And Sheriff, Thomas found out about the herbs yesterday. Harrison overheard him raging about it at the saloon. Pieces clicked into place in Miller's mind. The timing, the signs of struggle. The blood. Get Dr. Spencer and Harrison, he told Mrs. Baker. Tell them to meet me at my office in 10 minutes. Don't let Wilson know where we're going. And where is that? She asked. Miller's hand tightened on his gun belt. To find that Apache's camp. As the search parties dispersed into the wilderness, Miller cast one last look at the Wilson cabin. The gun belt felt suddenly heavier against his hip, a reminder of the weight of the law he carried, and the difficult balance between justice and prejudice in a frontier town where assumptions came too easily and truth was often the first casualty. Emma woke to unfamiliar sounds, the soft crackle of a fire, the distant call of unfamiliar birds, and low voices speaking a language she didn't understand. Pain radiated from her arm and ribs with each breath, but the fear that had driven her through the night had subsided. She lay on a soft pallet of furs inside a small shelter, its domed framework covered with hides and canvas. Sunlight filtered through a smoke hole above, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Beside her rested a small deerskin bag filled with pebbles, each stone painted with intricate symbols in red and black. The medicine pouch seemed to have been placed deliberately within her reach, though Emma was unsure of its purpose. She shifted slightly, causing the pallet to rustle. The voices outside ceased immediately. Running Wolf ducked through the low entrance, his tall frame having to bend almost double to enter. Relief washed over his features when he saw her awake. The fever has broken, he said, kneeling beside her. This is good. Emma tried to sit up, but gasped at the stabbing pain in her side. Be still, Running Wolf cautioned. Your body needs time to mend. He reached for the deerskin pouch, selecting a small round pebble painted with a red spiral. This one is for pain, he explained, placing it in her palm. Hold it while I prepare more medicine. Emma clutched the stone, its smooth surface warm against her skin. Where am I? My camp. Yellow Hawk and I brought you here after finding you in the night. Running Wolf poured a steaming liquid from a clay pot into a wooden cup. You have been asleep through one sun and night, a whole day. Emma tried to process this information. Pa will be... She stopped, memories flooding back, her father's rage, the blows, her desperate flight into the darkness. Running Wolf's expression softened. Your father will not find you here. You are safe. Yellow Hawk appeared at the entrance. his expression more guarded than his brother's. He spoke rapidly in Apache. Clearly concerned, Running Wolf responded calmly before turning back to Emma. "My brother worries. Taking a white child to an Apache camp is complicated. Will you send me back?" Emma's voice trembled. Running Wolf shook his head firmly. "Not to harm. Never to harm." He helped her drink the herbal tea, supporting her head gently. "But soon the white men will search for you. We must decide what happens then." The tea tasted bitter, but brought almost immediate relief to her pain. As it took effect, Emma studied the deerskin pouch with its painted stones. "What are the other ones for?" she asked. Running Wolf seemed pleased by her interest. "Each carries different medicine. This one," he selected a black stone with white flecks, "is for strength. This one, a smooth red pebble, calls protective spirits. My grandfather taught me their uses when I was younger than you. Like your bone whistle?" "Yes." Running Wolf touched the whistle that still hung around his neck. "Some medicine works through objects, some through plants, some through words or songs." Yellow Hawk spoke again from the entrance, his tone urgent. "My brother says we should return you to your people before they come looking," Running Wolf translated. "He fears what angry white men might do." Emma's fingers tightened around the pain stone. "They'll make me go back to Pa. Perhaps. Perhaps not." Running Wolf considered her bruised face. "The marks of his anger are clear for all to see now." "Doesn't matter," Emma said with the wisdom of a child who understood adult hypocrisy. "They'll still give me back to him. He's my Pa." Running Wolf was silent for a moment. "Among my people, a child belongs to the whole tribe. Any adult who harms a child answers to all. It's different for white folks," Emma said simply. Outside, Yellow Hawk called out again, this time in English. "Wolf, someone comes." Running Wolf rose quickly. "Stay here. Rest. I will speak with my brother." After he left, Emma examined the medicine pouch more closely. Each stone had been carefully chosen for its shape and color, before being painted with symbols that reminded her of the patterns on Running Wolf's clay pipe. She didn't understand their meaning, but holding them brought a strange comfort, as if each small pebble contained a piece of Running Wolf's quiet strength. She could hear the brothers talking outside, their voices low but intense. Yellow Hawk clearly wanted her gone. Running Wolf just as clearly refused to send her away. The argument continued until Yellow Hawk finally fell silent. Running Wolf returned, his expression grave. "Mrs. Baker has come looking for you, alone." Emma struggled to sit up. "Mrs. Baker?" "Yes. She says the town searches in many directions, but she guessed you might have sought me out." Running Wolf helped her into a sitting position. "She says your father claims you ran away for no reason, that you were clumsy." A bitter laugh escaped Emma, sending pain through her ribs. "That's what he always says." Running Wolf nodded, as if her response confirmed a decision already made. "Yellow Hawk says I'm a fool, but he will stand with me." He adjusted the fur covering around her shoulders. "I will not return you to harm, Emma Wilson. Not while these hands can still heal." The painted stones in the deerskin pouch seemed to grow warmer at his words, tiny repositories of courage and protection that Emma would need in the days to come, when the search parties would inevitably find their way to the Apache camp. The morning mist still clung to the valley, when the sound of approaching horses broke the dawn silence. Running Wolf stood at the edge of his camp, Yellow Hawk a silent presence beside him. Between them sat a small carved cedar box, Running Wolf's most precious possession, containing the sacred pollen his grandfather had collected from special plants, used only in times of great need or ceremony. Mrs. Baker had departed the previous evening with a message for Sheriff Miller. The girl was safe, her injuries being tended, and Running Wolf would speak with the sheriff alone at first light. Now the moment of reckoning had arrived. "They bring more than just the sheriff," Yellow Hawk observed. Counting the mounted figures emerging from the mist, Running Wolf nodded grimly. 6 men, and Thomas Wilson. The approaching party consisted of Sheriff Miller, Dr. Spencer, Harrison, Reverend Porter, Jenkins the blacksmith, and Thomas Wilson, perched awkwardly on a horse with his crutch tied to the saddle. Their faces were grim, their postures tense. Only Dr. Spencer and Harrison appeared without weapons. Running Wolf touched the cedar box, drawing strength from what it represented, the continuity of his people's ways, despite decades of loss and change. "Emma remains in the shelter," he told his brother. "Keep her there until I call." Sheriff Miller raised his hand, halting the party at a respectful distance. He dismounted, approaching alone. "Running Wolf," he acknowledged with a stiff nod. "Mrs. Baker said the Wilson girl is here." "She is." Being healed, Thomas Wilson urged his horse forward, his face contorted with anger. "You stole my daughter, you heathen bastard." Sheriff Miller held up a restraining hand. "That's enough, Thomas. Let me handle this." To Running Wolf, he continued, "I need to see her. Make sure she's all right." "She is not all right," Running Wolf replied evenly. "Her arm is broken." "Her ribs cracked." "Her face." He let the implication hang in the air. Thomas Wilson sputtered. "She fell running away after putting Indian poisons in my food." Dr. Spencer spoke up, his quiet voice carrying surprising authority. "Sheriff, I'd like to examine the girl. Professionally." Miller nodded. "That seems reasonable." Running Wolf considered the doctor, whose kind hands had tended to settlers and Indians alike during the fever outbreak. "The doctor may come." "And you, Sheriff?" "No others yet." Wilson started to protest, but Jenkins placed a calming hand on his arm. "Let the doc see her first, Thomas." Running Wolf led Miller and Spencer to his lodge. Before entering, he picked up the cedar box, holding it against his chest. Yellow Hawk stood guard at the entrance, his expression impassive, but his hand near the knife at his belt. Inside, Emma sat wrapped in a blanket, her splintered arm cradled against her chest, her face a canvas of purple and yellow bruises in various stages of healing. Her eyes widened with fear when Sheriff Miller ducked through the opening, but she relaxed slightly at the sight of Dr. Spencer. "Hello, Emma," the doctor said gently, setting his bag down. "May I look at your injuries?" She nodded, glancing at Running Wolf for reassurance. He placed the cedar box beside her pallet and sat nearby as Spencer conducted his examination. Sheriff Miller watched silently, his expression darkening as the doctor catalogued the injuries. Spiral fracture of the radius, consistent with twisting force. 2 cracked ribs. Contusions of varying ages. "Did your father do this to you, Emma?" the sheriff finally asked. Emma looked down at the cedar box beside her, its smooth surface worn from generations of handling. Running Wolf had shown her the sacred pollen inside, explaining how it connected all living things in a great circle of truth. "Yes," she whispered. "He found the medicine Running Wolf gave me for his drinking. He got mad, but this wasn't the first time," Dr. Spencer prompted gently. "No, sir." Tears welled in her eyes. "Been happening since Ma died. Getting worse." Sheriff Miller removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "Why didn't you tell anyone, child?" "Who'd believe me over Pa?" Her voice was small but clear. "He's white. A veteran. Running Wolf is the only one who—" She trailed off, unable to find words for the Apache's simple acceptance of her truth. Running Wolf opened the cedar box, revealing the golden pollen within. "In my tradition, this sacred substance can only exist in the presence of truth. No lies may be spoken near it." He met Sheriff Miller's eyes. "Emma speaks truth, as does her body's wounds." The sheriff nodded slowly, replacing his hat. "Doc, you finished?" "For now," Spencer replied, repacking his bag. "But she needs continued care. The arm's been well set, but those ribs need watching for lung complications." Miller straightened. "Wait here, please." He ducked outside, where voices immediately rose in question. Running Wolf could make out Thomas Wilson's angry protests above the others. Emma clutched Running Wolf's sleeve. "Don't let them take me back to him, please." "I will not," he promised, closing the cedar box reverently. "Whatever comes next, you will not return to harm." Minutes later, Sheriff Miller returned, his expression resolute. "Emma, I'd like you to come outside, just for a moment. Your father needs to hear the truth from you directly." Running Wolf started to object, but Emma squared her small shoulders. "I'll do it." "If Running Wolf comes with me." Miller hesitated, then nodded. "That seems fair." Running Wolf helped Emma to her feet, supporting her weight as they emerged into the morning light. He carried the cedar box in his free hand, a silent testament to the truth that was about to change everything. The courthouse in town was rarely used for actual legal proceedings. Most disputes were settled by Sheriff Miller's practical brand of frontier justice, with the occasional circuit judge passing through every few months for more serious matters. Today, however, the dusty space hummed with tension as townsfolk crowded the wooden benches. At the front of the room sat Judge Clayton Harmon, a stern-faced man whose worn black ledger contained both legal precedents and his personal notes from 20 years riding the territorial circuit. The ledger lay open before him on the makeshift bench, a simple table elevated on a platform as he listened to the testimony. Emma sat in a chair beside Mrs. Baker, her splintered arm in a fresh sling provided by Dr. Spencer. Running Wolf stood at the back of the room, his presence tolerated but not welcomed by many of the settlers. Yellow Hawk had refused to enter the white man's justice hall, choosing instead to wait outside with the horses. Thomas Wilson occupied a chair near Sheriff Miller, his crutch leaning against the wall, his expression alternating between righteous indignation and calculated remorse. "The territorial statutes are clear regarding parental authority," Judge Harmon stated, consulting his ledger. "However, they also provide for intervention in cases of demonstrated harm." Dr. Spencer had already testified to Emma's injuries, his clinical description drawing gasps from the assembled crowd. Mrs. Baker had spoken about the pattern of bruises she'd observed over months. Harrison confirmed Emma's fear when sent home without rum. Now it was Emma's turn. "Young lady," Judge Harmon said, his voice gentling slightly, "can you tell this court in your own words what happened the night you ran away?" Emma glanced toward Running Wolf, who gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. She took a deep breath. Pa found the medicine pouch. "The herbs Running Wolf gave me to help Pa not want the rum so bad," her clear voice carried through the hushed room. "He got real mad. Said I was poisoning him. He hit me with his fist, then pushed me against the wall. I ran when he went for his belt." Thomas Wilson surged to his feet. "She's lying. That savage has turned her against me, her own father." "Sit down, Mr. Wilson," Judge Harmon ordered, making a notation in his ledger. "You'll have your chance to speak." Sheriff Miller placed a restraining hand on Wilson's shoulder, forcing him back into his chair. Judge Harmon turned to Emma again. "And how did you come to be in the Apache's camp?" "I just ran. Into the woods," Emma's voice faltered. "I was scared and hurt. I thought maybe I could find Running Wolf's camp, but I fell and I don't remember after that. Running Wolf found me, fixed my arm, kept me safe." The judge made another note, then looked toward Running Wolf. "Do you wish to make a statement, Mr. Running Wolf?" A murmur rippled through the courtroom at this unexpected courtesy. Running Wolf stepped forward, his dignity evident in his measured stride. "I am a healer," he said simply. "Among my people, all adults protect all children. This is our way. I did only what any of my people would do, help a child who was hurt. Why involve yourself with a white child's troubles?" The judge pressed. "Surely you understood the complications this would create." Running Wolf's gaze swept the courtroom before settling back on the judge. "Pain speaks in one language. Healing should answer in the same." Judge Harmon studied him for a long moment, then returned to his ledger, turning pages as if searching for something specific. The Black Book contained multitudes, decades of rulings, precedents, and personal observations from frontier justice. When he found what he sought, his eyebrows rose slightly. "There is precedent here," he announced, surprising the room. "Carson County, 1865. A Cheyenne woman sheltered 2 white children after a wagon accident. The territorial court recognized her act as one of basic human decency, not interference." Thomas Wilson lurched to his feet again. "This is different. He poisoned my girl's mind against me, gave her foreign substances." Dr. Spencer cleared his throat. "If I may, Your Honor, I've examined the herbal remedy in question. It contains valerian root, skullcap, and other plants known to ease the physical symptoms of alcohol withdrawal. Nothing poisonous or harmful." Judge Harmon nodded, making another note. "Mr. Wilson, the evidence suggests a pattern of behavior inconsistent with proper guardianship. This court is inclined to remove the child from your care, at least temporarily, and place her where? Wilson demanded. The orphanage in Carson's Ridge. That's no place for my Sarah's daughter. At the mention of her mother, Emma's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down her face as Mrs. Baker wrapped a comforting arm around her shoulders. Judge Harmon frowned at the ledger before him, as if seeking wisdom from its pages. That is indeed the question. The child needs proper care while this matter is settled. He glanced around the courtroom. Are there any in this community willing to take responsibility for Emma Wilson until a permanent arrangement can be made? A heavy silence fell. Though many had come to witness, few wanted to involve themselves directly. Mrs. Baker shifted uncomfortably. Judge, I would, but with my 7 already? The silence stretched, damning in its implications. Emma's shoulders slumped with each passing second. Then a clear voice broke the silence from the back of the room. I will take her. All heads turned toward Running Wolf, whose tall figure seemed suddenly to fill the doorway where he stood. The black ledger lay open on the judge's bench, its pages recording a moment unlike any in the territory's history, when an Apache healer offered to become guardian to a white child in a frontier courtroom, where neither fully belonged. The town hall had never been so crowded. 2 days after Running Wolf's shocking offer in the courtroom, Judge Harmon had called for a community meeting to discuss the Wilson girl situation. Every bench was filled, with latecomers standing along the walls. At the front of the room, a territorial flag hung limply from its wooden stand. The stars and stripes a reminder of the laws and boundaries that defined their lives on the frontier. Emma sat between Mrs. Baker and Dr. Spencer in the first row. Running Wolf stood near the door, as was his custom in white gatherings, close enough to participate, far enough to escape if needed. Thomas Wilson was notably absent, having been temporarily detained by Sheriff Miller after attempting to confront Running Wolf outside the trading post the previous day. Judge Harmon called for order, banging a wooden gavel against the table. The room gradually quieted. This is an unprecedented situation, the judge began. The law provides clear guidance for removing a child from an unfit home. It is significantly less clear about placing a white child in the care of a, he hesitated, non-white guardian. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. It's unnatural. Jenkins, the blacksmith, called out, No offense to the Apache, but a white child belongs with white folk. Then why didn't any white folk offer to take her? Mrs. Baker challenged, her voice sharp. I recall a telling silence when the judge asked for volunteers. That's beside the point, Reverend Porter interjected. There are questions of propriety, of proper Christian upbringing. Running Wolf had remained silent, his expression impassive. Now he stepped forward, drawing all eyes. I ask permission to speak, he said quietly. Judge Harmon nodded. Though several townspeople grumbled their disapproval, Running Wolf moved to stand beside the territorial flag. He touched it briefly, a gesture that surprised many in the room. This flag, he said, marks boundaries drawn on paper. Lines that say, you belong here, not there. You are this, not that. My people lived without such lines for generations. He turned to face the crowd fully. I was born in a time of change. I've learned to live with your boundaries. But some truths exist beyond these lines you draw. He gestured toward Emma. A child's need for safety. A healer's duty to protect. These truths have no color. The room was silent now, every face turned toward the Apache. Emma watched him with complete trust, while the adults regarded him with emotions ranging from skepticism to grudging respect. In my tradition, Running Wolf continued, when a child loses their parents, they become a child of the whole community. Any lodge might take them in, feed them, raise them as their own. We do not ask, is this child from my clan? Do we ask only, does this child need shelter? Judge Harmon leaned forward. Your sentiments are admirable, but the practical concerns remain. How would you provide for her? Educate her? Prepare her for life in white society? The same way I learned to navigate your world while keeping my own traditions, Running Wolf replied. Emma would live in my lodge but attend your school. She would learn letters from your books, and healing ways from my teachings. She would keep her mother's memory and her own heritage. Harrison from the trading post cleared his throat. I've known Running Wolf for 8 years. He speaks better English than half the men in this room. Reads too. Surprised murmurs followed this revelation. My grandfather saw change coming, Running Wolf explained. He sent me to the mission school for 3 winters. I learned your words, your numbers, your God. I did not lose my own ways in the learning. Mrs. Baker stood suddenly. I propose a compromise. The child lives with Running Wolf, who has proven his ability to protect her. I will ensure she receives proper, womanly guidance. She glanced meaningfully around the room. Unless someone else wishes to take full responsibility. The resulting silence confirmed what everyone already knew. Despite their misgivings about an Apache guardian, none were willing to shoulder the burden themselves. Judge Harmon consulted briefly with Sheriff Miller, then turned back to the gathering. The law grants me considerable discretion in this matter, given the unusual circumstances. I am inclined to approve a provisional arrangement. He beckoned Emma forward. The girl approached slowly, her splinted arm a stark reminder of why they were all gathered. Emma Wilson, the judge said gently, you are old enough to have some say in this matter. Do you understand what Running Wolf is offering? Emma nodded, her eyes clear and certain. He wants to be my guardian, to keep me safe and teach me things like my pa should have done. And is this what you want? Emma turned to look at Running Wolf, then at Mrs. Baker, and finally back at the judge. Yes, sir. Running Wolf helped me when nobody else did. He didn't have to, but he did anyway. Judge Harmon's gaze moved to the territorial flag, its fabric still and lifeless in the stuffy room. The stars and stripes that represented law, order, and boundaries. Boundaries that Running Wolf was asking them all to reconsider. Very well, the judge announced. I am approving a 6-month guardianship, with regular oversight from Mrs. Baker and Sheriff Miller. At the end of that period, we will reassess the situation. The territorial flag hung witness to the extraordinary pronouncement, a symbol of a nation still determining who belonged within its embrace, and how different peoples might live together in this vast, unforgiving land where children sometimes needed protection that transcended the boundaries adults had drawn. 1 year later, the first spring flowers dotted the meadow surrounding the small cabin that stood halfway between town and Running Wolf's original camp. The structure represented compromise in physical form, built with logs in the settler style, but positioned to catch the morning sun in the Apache tradition. A vegetable garden flourished nearby, and smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney. On the cabin's front porch hung a simple wind chime crafted from deer antlers, hollow reeds, and copper bells. Its gentle music drifted on the breeze, marking the passage of time and seasons since Emma Wilson had become Emma Wilson Running Wolf, not by legal name change, but through the gradual blending of identities that the townsfolk had come to accept in their practical frontier way. Inside, Emma stood patiently as Mrs. Baker adjusted the collar of her new dress, sewn specially for today's occasion. You've grown at least 2 inches this winter, Mrs. Baker observed, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Running Wolf must be feeding you well, Emma smiled. We grow most of our food now. I'm learning which plants are good for eating and which are for medicine, and you're schooling. Mrs. Baker checked the girl's splint-free arm, which had healed straight and strong. Mr. Peterson says I read better than any of the other children, Emma replied with quiet pride. Running Wolf helps me practice every evening. The provisional 6-month guardianship had been extended to a year, and then, with surprisingly little debate, made permanent. Judge Harmon had been impressed by Running Wolf's dedication to ensuring Emma received both Apache wisdom and conventional education. The arrangement that had once scandalized the community had gradually become simply another frontier adaptation, unusual but functional. They're waiting for us, Mrs. Baker reminded her, gesturing toward the door. Emma nodded, taking a deep breath. Today marked an important milestone. Her father's return to town after completing a 6-month program at a veterans home in the territorial capital. where he had finally received proper treatment for both his war injuries and his drinking problem. Outside, Running Wolf stood in conversation with Sheriff Miller and Dr. Spencer. The three men had developed an unlikely friendship over the past year. United by their shared concern for Emma's welfare, "Are you certain you want to do this?" Running Wolf asked Emma as she joined them. "There is no obligation, I'm sure," she replied, her voice steady. At 9 years old, Emma carried herself with a composure beyond her years, her face having lost the perpetual wariness that had once been her most defining feature. The small group made their way toward town, the wind chimes' delicate music fading behind them. Emma walked between Running Wolf and Mrs. Baker, occasionally glancing up at her guardian with quiet confidence. Thomas Wilson waited outside the church, standing without his crutch for the first time in years. A new prosthetic leg provided by the Veterans Program allowed him to balance with just a cane. His face, once perpetually flushed with alcohol and anger, had regained some of its former handsome features. Sobriety had restored something of the man he had been before war, and loss had broken him. He straightened when he saw them approaching, anxiety evident in his posture. "Emma," he said softly when they reached him. She studied her father carefully, searching for signs of the man who had caused her so much fear. "Hello, Pa." Thomas's eyes flickered to Running Wolf, a complex emotion crossing his face. The two men had not spoken directly since the courthouse confrontation a year earlier. "Mr. Running Wolf," Thomas said stiffly, "I understand I owe you my daughter's life." Running Wolf inclined his head slightly. Emma saved herself by having the courage to seek help. "I was merely the help she found." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "The doctors at the veterans' home, they helped me understand some things. About the drinking. About what I did." He looked down at his new leg. "They fixed more than just this." Emma's hand found Running Wolf's, drawing strength from the connection. "The Reverend says I should ask forgiveness," Thomas continued. "But I know some things can't be undone with just words." "No," Emma agreed softly. "They can't." An awkward silence fell, broken only when Sheriff Miller suggested they all go inside the church, where Reverend Porter was waiting to begin the carefully orchestrated meeting, part reconciliation, part healing ceremony, designed by both the Reverend and Running Wolf to acknowledge the past while creating space for a new kind of future. As they entered the church, Emma paused in the doorway, looking back toward the distant cabin where the wind chime would be dancing in the spring breeze. The simple instrument had been Running Wolf's gift on the day the permanent guardianship was granted, a blend of Apache materials and European design that created harmony from difference. "We don't have to forgive him today," Running Wolf had told her that morning, "or ever, if your heart cannot. But we can begin to release the pain he caused, so it does not consume your future as his consumed his past." Emma nodded, understanding, like the wind chime that transformed chaotic air currents into music. Perhaps they could transform their broken history into something, if not healed, then at least harmonious enough to move forward. She stepped into the church, ready to face her father not as a frightened child, but as Emma Wilson Running Wolf, a girl with one foot in two worlds and the strength of both to guide her.